Update, caught my wife cheating with a train driver. Filing for divorce now. Hey Reddit, I never thought I'd end up here, but life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. Buckle up, because this story has more twists and turns than the train tracks my wife's lover drives on. My 35M, soon-to-be ex-wife, Sarah, 32F, and I have been married for 7 years. No kids, thankfully. Everything seemed great, or at least I thought it was. Sarah always loved traveling by train. She'd go on these little getaways a few times a month. It never struck me as odd because she loved exploring nearby towns and taking scenic routes. Plus, she'd always come back with pictures and stories about the places she'd visited. Turns out, her favorite scenic view wasn't the countryside. It was the train driver, Tom, 40-ish M. For months, maybe longer, they'd been having an affair. At first, it was just her taking trips with him driving the train. But then, they started meeting outside of his work hours. She'd make up excuses like, "Oh, I'm meeting friends for lunch," or "I need to stay late for a book club meeting." Yeah, book club my ass. The thing is, I didn't suspect a thing. Sarah was always charming, always had an answer for everything. But looking back, there were signs. She'd get unusually defensive if I asked too many questions about her trips. She'd keep her phone glued to her hand, but she was good at covering her tracks, or so she thought. The house of cards came crashing down about 2 weeks ago. I decided to surprise Sarah by joining her on one of her train trips. She'd been acting weirdly distant lately, so I thought maybe we could reconnect. When I told her my plan, she freaked out. Started yelling about how I was being controlling and invading her space. That should have been my first clue, but I brushed it off. I went anyway. Here's the kicker. I caught them. Red-handed. Or should I say red-faced. I got on the train early, hiding out in one of the back compartments. As the journey started, I decided to look for Sarah, thinking maybe she was sitting alone, enjoying the view. But no, I found her in the driver's cabin with Tom. Pants around their ankles, going at it like horny teenagers. I froze. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. It felt like one of those out-of-body experiences. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. When Sarah noticed me standing there, she screamed. Then came the hysterics. She started sobbing, yelling, and accusing me of spying on her. Can you believe that? Like I'm the bad guy here. Tom just stood there, trying to pull his pants up, mumbling something about not wanting any trouble. Dude, you're literally banging another man's wife. Trouble is part of the package. I didn't stick around for their excuses. I walked off the train at the next station, completely numb. Sarah followed me, still shouting and crying. She swore it was just sex, that it meant nothing. Then she tried flipping the script, saying it was my fault for not being emotionally available. Classic gaslighting. When we got home, she doubled down on the lies. She claimed Tom was just a friend, that they'd only done it once, blah, blah, blah. But her phone told a different story. Texts, photos, even a couple of videos. She'd been seeing him for over a year. That was it for me. I told her I was filing for divorce. She lost it. Full-blown meltdown mode. Accused me of throwing away our marriage and said I'd regret this decision forever. Well, Reddit, I don't regret it one bit. Here's where the story gets even crazier. After I served her divorce papers, she showed up at my office, causing a scene. She told my coworkers I was emotionally abusive and tried to get me fired. Thankfully, my boss knows me well enough not to buy into her nonsense. Then, a few days later, Tom's wife reached out to me. Yep, he's married too. Turns out, Sarah and Tom weren't as discreet as they thought. His wife found out about the affair through their joint bank account, hotel charges, fancy dinners, the works. She's filing for divorce too. So now, Sarah's left with nothing. No husband, no lover, no alibi. Just the mess she created. Honestly, I'm relieved. It hurts, sure, but I know I'm better off without her. I've already contacted a lawyer, and I'm focusing on rebuilding my life. Maybe one day, I'll look back on this and laugh. For now, I'm just glad the train wreck of my marriage is finally over. Thanks for reading, Reddit. If you've got any advice or similar stories, feel free to share. Update, my wife's cheating escalated. Now there's a trolley bus driver, and I'm genuinely scared. Hey Reddit. I didn't expect my first post to blow up like it did, and I appreciate everyone who reached out with advice or shared their own experiences. I thought catching Sarah with the train driver would be the climax of this disaster, but it turns out I underestimated just how far things could spiral. Buckle up, because this sequel's about to get even wilder. After the divorce papers were served, Sarah went into overdrive trying to win me back. At first, it was the usual stuff. Long texts, voicemails, even a couple of teary late-night visits to my place. I ignored all of it. I was done. But Sarah doesn't take rejection well. One evening, I was walking home from work when a trolley bus pulled up beside me. The doors opened, and guess who was behind the wheel? Sarah. Now, before you ask, no, she didn't suddenly become a trolley bus driver. Apparently, she'd struck up some kind of connection with this guy, Kevin, mid-30 SM, who drove the local routes. She'd been spending time with him while pretending to work on herself post-affair. Classic Sarah move. Kevin leaned out and said something like, "Hey, buddy, hop in. Sarah's been telling me all about you." What? Why was my ex-wife telling her new fling about me? Against my better judgment, I got on. I thought maybe I could get her to stop this bizarre obsession with dragging me into her mess. Big mistake. The moment I sat down, Sarah started ranting. "Why can't you just forgive me? I was lonely. You pushed me into Tom's arms." Kevin chimed in, "Yeah, man. You should have been there for her. She's a catch." A catch? Was this guy for real? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But then Sarah dropped a bombshell. "Tom was a mistake," she said. "Kevin's different. He's ready to fight for me. And for us?" Us? That's when Kevin pulled over, turned to me, and said, "Listen, man, if you don't take her back, I'll make you regret it." My heart skipped a beat. Kevin wasn't some scrawny pushover like Tom. He was built, like he spent his free time lifting trolley buses for fun. And the way he said it, calm and steady, sent a shiver down my spine. I got off the trolley bus at the next stop and walked away as fast as I could. But things didn't end there. Over the next few days, I started noticing Kevin's trolley bus parked near my apartment at odd hours. Once, I even spotted him sitting inside, staring at my building. It felt like he was watching me. Then, one night, I heard a loud banging on my door. When I opened it, Sarah was there, crying hysterically. She claimed Kevin had turned violent, accusing her of still being in love with me. I didn't believe her at first. Sarah had lied so much by this point that it was hard to tell what was real. But when she rolled up her sleeve and showed me a nasty bruise, I knew she wasn't making this part up. Against my better judgment, I let her in. She spent the night on the couch while I locked myself in the bedroom. The next morning, I woke up to find her cooking breakfast like nothing had happened. "We can start over," she said with a smile, holding out a plate of pancakes. I told her to leave. She flipped out, throwing the plate against the wall and screaming about how I was ruining her life. Eventually, I managed to get her out the door, but not before she promised, "You'll regret this too." The fear set in when I started receiving anonymous threats, notes left on my car, voicemails from blocked numbers, things like, "You don't deserve her," and "You'll pay for what you've done." I have no proof, but I'm convinced it's Kevin. I filed a police report and installed security cameras around my apartment, but the anxiety is eating away at me. Every time I hear a trolley bus outside, my stomach drops. I thought catching Sarah with Tom was the worst thing that could happen, but now I'm living in constant fear. I don't know what Kevin's capable of, or if Sarah's still pulling strings behind the scenes. I just want this nightmare to end. If anyone has advice on how to deal with this, please let me know. I'm at my wit's end. My ex-wife, her lovers, and a chain of chaos. Police, pets, and kids involved. Hey Reddit. It's been a whirlwind, and I honestly wish I didn't have to write this. Things have escalated beyond my wildest nightmares. At this point, I'm wondering if my life is secretly a cursed soap opera. After my last post, I was doing everything I could to avoid Sarah and her new psycho trolleybus boyfriend, Kevin. But then Sarah dropped another bombshell, one that turned my world upside down. She showed up at my door again, this time holding the hand of a little girl who couldn't have been older than 6. Final update. The nightmare continues. Accidents, theft, and tragedy. Hey Reddit, I didn't think my life could get any worse, but here I am, once again, staring at my screen, trying to make sense of the madness that has taken over my existence. What I'm about to share feels too insane to be real, but unfortunately, this is my reality. After Sarah's arrest for breaking into my apartment and kidnapping Mrs. Green's cat, I thought things would finally calm down. For a few days, it did. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of town, hoping to start fresh. But the storm was far from over. The officer's tragedy. The first sign that things weren't truly over happened a week later. I got a call from one of the police officers who had been helping me through this mess, Officer Daniels. He was a kind man, always patient and understanding despite the chaos Sarah had created. Daniels was calling to update me on the charges against Sarah and Kevin. As he was talking, I suddenly heard a loud crash on his end of the line. The phone went silent. I found out later that Officer Daniels had been standing by his patrol car on the side of the road when a speeding SUV swerved out of control and hit him. The impact was so severe that he didn't survive. The news shook me to my core. Daniels had been one of the few people who made me feel safe during all this. Animal tragedy. As if that wasn't bad enough, the next horrifying event came just days later. Mrs. Green's beloved cat, Muffin, was found poisoned in her yard. Shortly after, the police discovered Kevin's Rottweiler had been abandoned and later euthanized due to injuries it had sustained while living under his care. I couldn't help but feel responsible, even though I wasn't directly involved. It was as if anyone or anything connected to this mess was doomed. The children's crime. And then came the kids. Remember the little girl Sarah claimed was mine? Turns out, she wasn't the only child Sarah had dragged into her chaos. Sarah had been babysitting another child, a boy named Jason, before her arrest. Jason and the little girl, let's call her Emma, had been left unsupervised after Sarah's meltdown. One evening, while I was at home trying to process everything, I got another call, this time from the police. Mr. Smith, do you know a Jason and an Emma? I explained that I didn't know them personally, but knew of them through Sarah. That's when the officer dropped the bombshell. They stole a car. They crashed it into the front entrance of the police station. I was speechless. Two kids, no older than 10, had somehow managed to hotwire a car, probably something they'd seen in a movie, and driven it straight into the station. The officer explained that the crash didn't cause any major injuries, but the building's entrance was heavily damaged. When questioned, Jason and Emma claimed they were trying to help Sarah because she told them the police were bad guys. I couldn't believe it. Even behind bars, Sarah was manipulating people, kids, no less, to fight her battles. The final confrontation. I knew then that I couldn't keep running. Sarah's chaos was like a virus, infecting everyone she touched. I decided to confront her one last time, face to face, in the hopes of putting an end to this nightmare. I visited her in jail, sitting across from her in one of those sterile, fluorescent-lit visitor rooms. She looked disheveled but still had that smug, manipulative smirk on her face. "What do you want?" she sneered. "I want you to stop," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You've ruined enough lives. Just stop." She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think I'm the one ruining lives? Look at yourself, running like a scared little boy. You were never strong enough for me. That's why I left you." Her words stung, but I held my ground. This isn't about me anymore. It's about everyone else you've hurt. Kevin, the kids, even Muffin. You've left nothing but destruction in your wake. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I guess you'll just have to live with it," she said, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied grin. The aftermath. That was the last time I saw Sarah. She's still in jail, awaiting trial for everything she's done. The kids have been placed with their real families, who are doing their best to shield them from the trauma. As for me, I've started therapy to work through the anxiety and fear this ordeal has left me with. Some nights, I still wake up in a cold sweat, hearing the sound of breaking glass or a trolley bus horn in my dreams. I don't know if I'll ever feel truly safe again, but I'm trying. For now, all I can do is move forward and hope that the chaos Sarah brought into my life is finally over. Stay safe, Reddit. And if someone ever seems too good to be true, trust your gut. They probably are. "She's yours," Sarah said. her voice trembling. I froze. What? We never had kids during our marriage. I didn't even know she had a child in her life. Don't lie to me, Sarah, I said, my voice shaking. She burst into tears, claiming she had gotten pregnant just before we got married but hadn't told me. She said she'd sent the child to live with her parents while we were settling down. I demanded a DNA test, but she refused, saying it was too traumatic for the child. Things got worse when Kevin showed up the next day, screaming outside my building about how I was stealing his family. He had a dog with him, a big, mean-looking Rottweiler, and was yanking its leash like he was about to sick it on me. The situation was so tense that my neighbor, a sweet old lady named Mrs. Green, came out with her cat, Muffin, in her arms, trying to defuse the situation. Kevin, clearly unhinged, started yelling at her to mind her own business. The dog lunged, barking like mad, and the next thing I knew, it had bitten Mrs. Green on the leg. Muffin freaked out, leaped out of her arms, and scratched Kevin across the face. I called 911 while trying to help Mrs. Green back into her house. Kevin fled the scene with his dog, and Sarah, who had been watching from a distance, started screaming at me for causing all this drama. When the police arrived, Mrs. Green confirmed everything, but Sarah tried to spin the story, claiming I had provoked Kevin. The officers weren't buying it, though, especially when Mrs. Green backed me up. The cops tracked Kevin down later that day. Turns out, he had a history of violence and had been arrested before for assault. They confiscated the dog, and Kevin is now facing charges for the attack on Mrs. Green. But that wasn't the end. Oh no. Sarah's lies kept piling up. 2 days later, a social worker showed up at my apartment. Apparently, Sarah had reported me for abandoning my child and claimed I was an unfit parent. I was floored. I had to explain the entire situation, showing texts and photos that proved Sarah had only just introduced this child into my life. The social worker was understanding, but said they had to follow up on every report. They ended up questioning Sarah as well, and that's when her house of cards came crashing down. Turns out, the little girl wasn't even hers. She was the daughter of one of her friends, who had agreed to let Sarah borrow her for this twisted scheme. At this point, I was done playing nice. I filed a restraining order against Sarah. The police, who were already familiar with her antics by now, seemed relieved to help. But the night after the restraining order was issued, things got terrifying. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of glass shattering. Someone had broken a window in my living room. I grabbed a bat and called the cops, my heart pounding. When the officers arrived, they found Sarah hiding in the bushes outside. She was holding Muffin, Mrs. Green's cat, and claiming she was rescuing it from my abuse. It was like something out of a bad horror movie. Sarah was arrested on the spot, and Muffin was safely returned to Mrs. Green. Now, Sarah is facing multiple charges: breaking and entering, filing false reports, and harassment. Kevin is still in custody for his assault case, and I'm finally starting to feel like I can breathe again. As for the little girl, her real parents were horrified when they learned what Sarah had done. They've cut ties with her completely. I've also decided to move to a new apartment in a different part of town. I can't live in the shadow of all this madness anymore. Looking back, it's almost surreal how quickly my life went from normal to a complete circus. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: never ignore the red flags, no matter how small they seem at the time. Stay safe out there, Reddit. You never know what kind of chaos might be lurking around the corner.